There is a hidden pattern that has taken down every major superpower that followed it. Spain in the 1600s, Britain after two world wars, the Soviet Union in just a few years. Three empires, three total collapses, all moving through the same seven stages. And right now, in the mid 2020s, the United States is deep inside that same sequence. For decades, America has looked untouchable, the strongest military on earth, the world's reserve currency, the biggest financial markets, and the most powerful tech companies. But if you zoom out and look not at headlines, but at long term patterns, the picture changes. The same warning signs that showed up before Spain's bankruptcy, before Britain's imperial breakdown, and before the Soviet Union's sudden implosion are now visible again. This video is not about predicting an exact date or cheering for collapse. It is about pattern recognition, how great powers overextend, debase their money, suffocate under debt, hollow out their productive base, fall into social decay, lose their privileged currency status, and then, finally, snap. History has already written this script 3 times. The only open question is, where exactly is the United States on this timeline? And how much time is left? When people imagine the end of an empire, they think of dramatic invasions, burning cities, or sudden regime change. But that is almost never how it starts. Imperial collapse usually begins quietly, with economic exhaustion. The empire takes on more commitments than it can sustain. On paper, everything still works. The currency circulates, the government pays its bills, the army looks strong. But beneath the surface, the foundations are rotting. Resources are misallocated. Debt piles up. Real productive capacity shrinks. The brightest people stop building and start speculating, or simply leave. From the outside, the system appears stable, until one day it doesn't. All three historical superpowers followed the same 7-stage sequence: military overextension, currency debasement, debt spiral, loss of productive capacity, social decay, loss of reserve currency status or core status, rapid collapse. Each empire believed it was exceptional. Each believed the rules did not apply. Each was wrong. The uncomfortable part is this: when you line up those 7 stages against modern America, 5 are already clearly in progress. Every empire starts with a genuine strategic need: defend borders, secure trade routes, project enough power to deter rivals. But once supremacy is reached, restraint disappears. The empire begins to believe it must be everywhere, all the time. The United States today maintains hundreds of military facilities and deployments spread across the globe, from Europe and the Middle East to East Asia and beyond. There are mutual defense treaties, security guarantees, and informal red lines that implicitly commit America to act in dozens of regions at once. The annual defense budget is larger than that of the next group of major countries combined. And yet, senior officials and analysts routinely warn that the military is stretched thin. Aging equipment, recruitment challenges, and the impossible task of deterring or fighting multiple great power conflicts at the same time. Imagine for a moment 3 simultaneous crises: a major conflict in Eastern Europe, a blockade or invasion scenario in the Western Pacific, and a regional war in the Middle East that threatens global energy supplies. Each of these alone would stress any nation. Together, they would push even a superpower to its limits. Military overextension is not just about money. It is about attention and political will. When a state promises security to everyone, everywhere, it eventually discovers that it cannot fully honor those promises. That realization does not show up on a balance sheet. It shows up in credibility. Spain learned this when it tried to fight on multiple fronts across Europe and the New World. Britain learned it when it tried to police a quarter of the globe through 2 world wars. The Soviet Union learned it as it poured resources into matching American deployments around the world. The United States is now in the same position, committed to defend more interests than its economy and society are willing or able to support over the long term. Stage one is not hypothetical. It is already here. When empires overextend, they face a choice: raise taxes and accept political backlash, cut commitments and accept strategic retreat, or quietly debase the currency and hope nobody notices for a while. In pre modern empires, this meant literally mixing cheaper metals into coins while keeping the face value the same. In the modern world, it takes a different form: aggressive expansion of the money supply, ultra low interest rates, and policies that systematically erode the purchasing power of the currency over time. For the United States, the turning point was abandoning any link between the dollar and gold. From that moment on, money became purely political. It was no longer constrained by finite reserves, only by human decisions and inflation risk. Over the last few decades, each crisis — a market crash, a recession, a pandemic, a financial accident — has been met with the same answer: expand credit, create more dollars, and push rates down. In the short term, this softens the pain. In the long term, it trains markets, companies, and even governments to depend on endless liquidity. Prices rise faster than official wage growth for large parts of the population. Assets inflate: stocks, real estate, speculative bubbles. Those with capital benefit. Those without are left chasing a moving target. The result is a society that feels richer on paper, but more fragile in reality. Currency debasement is not just about printing money. It is about turning money from a reliable store of value into a political tool. Spain debased its silver coins. Britain strained to maintain an overvalued currency until markets forced a reset. The Soviet Union ended up with a currency nobody trusted, even inside its own borders. When trust in money is slowly eroded, people look for alternatives: foreign currencies, gold, commodities, real assets, or even new digital forms of value. That silent loss of confidence is the second stage of collapse. And once an empire relies on debasement to sustain its obligations, it almost never goes back voluntarily. Debt, by itself, is not a problem. Used wisely, it can finance growth, infrastructure, and productive investment. But when borrowing becomes the default answer to every political and economic problem, it changes character. It becomes a trap. The United States has reached a point where total public debt is larger than the size of its annual economy. Interest payments consume a growing share of government revenue. Instead of borrowing for new projects, the state increasingly borrows just to pay the interest on old borrowing. This is the classic shape of a debt spiral. You borrow to close budget gaps. As debt rises, interest payments grow. To pay interest without raising taxes or cutting spending, you borrow more. Each shock — a war, a crisis, a recession — adds another layer of permanent obligations. At first, this looks manageable. As long as rates stay low and investors believe in the system, the pain is delayed. But when inflation appears and central banks are forced to raise rates, the math flips. Debts that were easy to roll over suddenly become heavy. Spain declared formal bankruptcies multiple times. Britain turned from creditor to debtor empire, selling off assets and influence to stay afloat. The Soviet Union simply ran out of hard currency and real value to trade for essentials. For America, there is no foreign emperor demanding payment in gold. There is a global network of investors, governments, and institutions holding trillions of dollars in bonds, all on the shared assumption that the system will keep functioning. The real danger is not that the United States cannot pay at all. It is that the combination of rising interest costs, political gridlock, and persistent deficits locks the country into a path where each year depends on even higher borrowing than the last. Once an empire is trapped in a debt spiral, every decision becomes reactive. Leaders are no longer shaping the future, they are buying time from it. In every failed empire, there is a moment when people realize a brutal truth. The country at the center of the system no longer makes enough of what the world actually needs. Spain imported manufactured goods while exporting precious metals. Britain watched its industries lose ground to more efficient competitors. The Soviet Union produced massive quantities of low quality output, but fell hopelessly behind in innovation and consumer goods. For the United States, the warning signs have been building for decades. Factories have closed or moved abroad. Entire towns that once revolved around manufacturing have hollowed out. Key supply chains, from pharmaceuticals and electronics to basic components, have shifted to countries with cheaper labor and looser regulations. On paper, America still leads in many high value sectors: software, advanced semiconductors design, aerospace, finance, entertainment. But the physical backbone that supports a superpower, steel, energy, rare earth processing, critical components, industrial machinery, is now deeply intertwined with, and in many areas dependent on, foreign production. Trade, by itself, is not a weakness. Specialization can make everyone richer. The problem appears when a superpower takes its own productive base for granted, assuming that it can always buy what it no longer makes. This works as long as the currency is strong, supply chains are stable, and geopolitical rivals remain cooperative. It fails the moment trust breaks, shipping halts, or a major conflict interrupts the flow of goods. Imagine a crisis where shipping lanes are disrupted, a key supplier of advanced components restricts exports, energy prices spike, and the domestic industrial base is too thin to ramp up quickly. Suddenly, the world's mightiest military cannot get enough parts. The most sophisticated tech firms cannot get enough chips. Everyday consumers cannot get essential medicines without delays. This is what loss of productive capacity looks like in the modern age. Not absolute poverty, but dangerous dependence. An empire that does not control its own critical production is strong only as long as nothing goes seriously wrong. History suggests that nothing goes wrong is never a lasting strategy. By the time an empire reaches stage 5, something deeper has broken. Not just the economy, but the social fabric. For Spain, this meant a culture where work was despised by the elites, corruption was widespread, and the most capable people left for more dynamic societies. For Britain, it meant disillusionment, decline in national confidence, and the slow realization that the empire was gone and would not return. For the Soviet Union, it meant cynicism. Nobody believed official propaganda, nobody trusted institutions, and everyone did whatever they could to survive inside a failing system. In the United States, signs of advanced social decay are hard to miss. Trust in institutions, government, media, corporations, even science, has fallen to historic lows. Political polarization has reached a point where large segments of the population see each other not as opponents, but as enemies. Major cities struggle with homelessness, addiction, and crime. Younger generations doubt that they will ever achieve the same stability their parents had. At the same time, digital technology amplifies every conflict. Anger, fear, and outrage spread faster than reasoned debate. Instead of building common ground, the information environment rewards extremism and constant emotional arousal. Add to this a demographic squeeze: fewer children, an aging population, and mounting pressure on social systems funded by a shrinking base of productive workers. An empire in social decay is like a building whose internal beams are rotting. From the outside, the structure still stands. Inside, critical supports are weakening. When a shock hits, financial, geopolitical, or environmental, a healthy society can argue, adapt, and pull together. A decayed society fractures. At stage 5, collapse is not inevitable, but it becomes dramatically harder to avoid. No technical fix can compensate for a breakdown in trust, shared purpose, and basic social cohesion. Every empire that dominates global trade enjoys a special advantage. Its money becomes the default unit for international transactions and savings. This reserve currency privilege allows the core country to borrow more cheaply and to run deficits that would crush any normal state. Spain had this power when its silver coins circulated across Europe. Britain had it when the pound sterling anchored global finance. The United States has held it through the dollar since the mid 20th century. Reserve currency status does not last forever. It depends on three things: trust in the issuing country's stability, confidence that its debts will be honored in real terms, and the absence of a credible alternative. For decades, the dollar has faced no serious rival. Even today, most global trade, energy sales, and financial contracts are denominated in dollars. Central banks around the world hold large portions of their reserves in US assets. But slowly, quietly, this is starting to shift. Some major economies experiment with settling trade in their own currencies. Regional blocs discuss alternatives to dollar-based systems. Central banks diversify reserves into gold and other assets. New payment systems emerge that bypass traditional dollar-centric infrastructure. This is not a sudden coup, it is erosion. Each individual change seems minor. Together, they signal a gradual decline in the world's willingness to rely exclusively on one country's money. Losing reserve currency status does not just mean psychological loss of prestige. It means that the United States would suddenly have to live under the same financial constraints as every other country. Borrowing would become more expensive. Deficits would face immediate market pressure. The ability to export inflation by sending excess dollars abroad would shrink. At that point, the earlier stages, military overextension, currency debasement, debt spiral, and loss of productive capacity, would converge. The empire would no longer be able to fund everything it has promised. Difficult choices that were delayed for decades would arrive all at once. This is stage 6, the moment when the world quietly decides that it no longer wants to hold as many of your IOUs and starts sending them back home. Collapse is often imagined as a single dramatic event. In reality, it is a chain reaction. For Spain, it meant a series of bankruptcies, loss of territories, and permanent decline from first-rank status. For Britain, it meant rapid decolonization, currency crises, and the end of global dominance within a few decades. For the Soviet Union, it meant the literal disappearance of the state in just a few years, without a major foreign invasion. For the United States, a collapse would not necessarily look like civil war or instant chaos. More likely, it would be a sudden phase shift, a sharp currency crisis, a loss of market confidence in government debt, a political breakdown in which basic functions of the state stop working, and a fast reordering of global alliances and trade networks. Everyday life would not stop overnight, but the mental map of the world, who is in charge, what money is safe, which promises can be trusted, would change faster than most people can process. The most dangerous part is this: right up until the tipping point, most citizens of collapsing empires feel that things are still mostly normal. The shops are open, the planes are flying, the news is full of scandals and distractions. Then, in what feels like an instant, events move too fast to follow. So, where is America in this 7-stage pattern? Military overextension, clearly underway. Currency debasement, ongoing for decades. Debt spiral, visible in the numbers and accelerating. Loss of productive capacity. Advanced, though partially masked by high-tech sectors. Social decay. Obvious in polarization, distrust, and demographic stress. Loss of reserve currency status. Still early, but the first cracks are forming. Collapse. Not yet, but the path from stage 5 to 7 can be brutally short. History does not guarantee that the United States will follow Spain, Britain, and the Soviet Union all the way to the final stage. Reform is possible. Renewal is possible. But no empire has ever escaped collapse by denying that the pattern applies to it. The question is not whether America is exceptional. The question is whether it is willing to confront the same hard arithmetic and structural limits that every previous superpower eventually faced before the pattern completes itself.